Hey everybody, and welcome back to the spring training video series. Today's topic is going to focus on utilization of corn herbicides, but making sure we're aware of those proper cutoff stages. And Jared, especially when we get into that May to June time frame, corn is growing really fast. So proper cutoff timings is definitely something we need to be aware of.
Absolutely, and a lot of that's to keep us out of trouble, Mike, right? I mean, there's a lot of reasons for cutoff timings of different herbicides. You know, one of them might be because of residue issues in grain, or even, you know, the plant back rotations into next year. But more commonly, the ones we run across are because of crop response. We want to make sure that we're putting those out in a safe fashion, that the herbicide is designed to be used. So going too late with some of these things or getting outside of that safety window that we've been testing for these ensures that we have a successful year and we're not trying to rob yield by dinging our own crops, right? So, you know, one of the things that we want to understand is what do these cutoffs look like? And a lot of times it's around height of a plant or even a growth stage of a plant. So specifically today we're talking about corn. So, you know, height's pretty easy. If it says 11 inches, you get a yardstick or a ruler out and you measure that. Yep. But why don't you walk us through what these growth stages are, Mike? Because maybe not everybody knows what that looks like.
Yeah, Jared, so we count growth stages in corn. We call it leaf stages, but that can actually be a little bit misleading because it's actually based on the leaf collars. That's what's going to determine our growth stage. So when we go out and we look at a corn plant, and you can see this in the picture behind, we actually have these collars that form at the base of the leaf, and a mature leaf or a fully formed leaf will have a very clear collar wrapping around the stem of the corn plant. So you can see two of them here in this picture, and then we've got an additional one starting to form just above there, but we wouldn't quite consider that a full collar yet. So that's actually what's driving how we determine those leaf stages. So you're going to see several more leaves than what are actually at the collar stage that we're at. So just make sure to keep that in mind, but how many fully formed collars that you have out there, that's what's going to be your growth stage.
Yeah, so for example, Mike, if something says V4, that means we're counting 1, 2, 3, 4 of these collars, sure. Right? Yeah, yep. So just to be clear on that. So when we start talking about a lot of these common herbicides that we use in corn, let's run through a few of them because we just want to highlight some of the ones we may want to be aware of this spring. And the first one that comes to mind that has the earliest cutoff is some of our brands with what we call the Kickstore brands, yep. Verdict or Sharpen. Those are, you know, nice early burn down products, but as soon as that corn emerges out of the ground, it's stopped, right? So you can chase a planter with it, but as soon as we start to see that spikelet come out of the ground, it's a no-fly zone. So we have to stop those applications at emergence. And for applicators out there, if you know you're in a field that's already been planted, it may be worth taking a moment to step out of that sprayer and just make sure we don't see any corn starting to poke its head through that soil, because that would be a time that we can't spray Sharpen or Verdict in these fields. You know, another one to talk about that we sell a lot of is Status, and it's a little different because it's got a somewhat limited window. It's got from what we call a V2 to a V8 window, so you can't maybe start it as early. So we're looking for at least 2 of those collars. We can go all the way up to that V8 range. So it's got a nice wide flexible window, but it's also very unique in kind of what its cutoffs look like.
Yeah, Jared, and another one that's not necessarily from the BASF lineup, but one of the most common corn herbicides that we run across is atrazine. This one, a little bit more simple, goes back to purely measuring. So the cutoff for atrazine is going to be 12 inches tall. So take your ruler out there and stick it next to the corn plant, and if it's taller than that, then you're past that cutoff. So that one's pretty cut and dry, but a popular option. So make sure to keep that in mind, because atrazine, while commonly used as an addition to a tank mix, also a component on many of our corn herbicide premixes that we use out there as well. So always be cognizant of, if you're using a product that does contain atrazine, you are going to have that 12-inch cutoff thrown in there as well. Outside of that, you could start getting into a large variety of corn herbicides out there. There's a pretty long list of them, and especially when you think of some of the older ALS chemistries that do still have a place in the world today, maybe not as effective on some of our driver weeds, but some of those secondary weeds that we don't often think about that are still important to control. Those can tend to vary in terms of their cutoffs. So what we encourage you to do is make sure you read the label of whatever product it is that you're using and be aware of what that cutoff is going to be. A lot of them fall in that V4 to V6. I know that was an old adage of the V6 cutoff, but some of them could vary. So whichever one you're using, be sure that you check the label just to make sure.
And if you would happen to use Liberty, just remember Liberty has that V6 cutoff. It's maybe a little earlier than some of the ones that we traditionally think about, because I would say a vast majority of the herbicides that we still use today, including Armazon Pro, Status, and even Roundup, have got the V8 timing. And that's kind of the late end of our corn herbicide timing window. If we get much after that, we start to risk our crop injury, right? Because of where that corn plant's at in its life. After V8, we start to see that rapid ear development, and it has a lot less tolerance for herbicides and that plant's ability to metabolize that herbicide. So really, you know, we start talking to growers that get into the end of the year, especially if you're in a one-pass system, I encourage you guys to get out and at least look at your fields well before we get to that V8 timing, because after we get past that, there's really not any tools I can give you to go out and rescue treatment without risking the yield in your crop, because that is kind of our hard cutoff for a lot of the herbicides that we use today.
Yeah, Jared, and I really like that you mentioned getting out there before that V8 stage. Don't wait till your V8 stage to go and check and then find out that unfortunately maybe you do have a weed problem. You're putting your retailers, if you're utilizing custom application, you're putting those retailers in a really tough spot to where they're either risking not getting good weed control, or they're going to risk injury to the crop. And neither of those is a situation that anybody wants to be in. And by being a little proactive and getting out there ahead of time, you're going to offer yourself a lot more flexibility. And just to kind of round this out, I think flexibility is a good word to touch on here.
Yeah, and I guess that's what I'm most proud of, at least for the BASF portfolio. I feel like the products that we have are very flexible. What do you think about Armazon Pro or Status being very effective for one? We've got some pretty wide windows of application that should fit a lot of growers' needs.
Sure. And
even in the burn down aspect of that verdict, we maybe don't think of it as being as flexible because it's a pre-only. You can start going out pretty early with that thing and start to burn down some of these fields as they green up in the spring. So I really feel like we've got a flexible portfolio that provides really good protection on a residual standpoint. We often don't hit on that in corn, but it's still also an important piece. And so I guess at the end of the day, we don't mean to bring up all the negatives by talking about cutoffs, but in reality, it's important to know where you're at, because it helps you make your plan, it helps you choose your herbicides, and also what fits your farm. If you need that flexibility, you may want to choose one with a little bit wider window of application.
Yep, Jared, couldn't have said it better myself. And I think the final thing is just make sure to be proactive. You're not going to back yourself into a corner against some of those cutoffs if you go into it with a proactive plan. You're utilizing a sound program that involves those residuals as well. You do that, those cutoffs aren't going to be an issue. You're going to be out there well before that becomes a problem for you.
Well said, Mike.
Hey folks, thanks for watching. The thoughts and comments expressed on these videos are the opinions of the nozzle heads. Be sure to like and subscribe down below to be notified of new videos and content.